So good morning, and thank you for taking the time to view this particular slideshow. When we get to class on Monday, we'll have a little bit more in-depth discussion of Piaget and Vygotsky as they relate to teaching. I just wanted to go over a few of the key terms with you in preparation for Monday so that we can have a more efficient and productive discussion on Monday. So Piaget looked at the thought processes, the cognitive processes in relationship to learning. He came up with a number of things. First of all, when we learn, we organize things into schemas, which are representations of organized knowledge into groups of things that we put them together. With those schemas, then, when we learn new information, we do one of two things. We either assimilate our new knowledge and put them into our existing schemas, or we accommodate our existing schemas to fit new information and experiences. So in other words, we modify what we understand based upon this new information. We also work with organization, and that is then grouping the isolated behaviors into a higher order system. So we organize our schemas into patterns. Then the idea of equilibration is that shift or a resolution of conflict to reach a balance. Anytime you learn new information that promotes what is called disequilibration, and then as you resolve that conflict, either through assimilation or accommodation, we reach a state of equilibration, which then has moved the new knowledge into areas of understanding. Piaget said that these stages are age-relative and distinctive. That's one of the criticisms of Piaget was the distinctiveness of his ages, that they're separate, so that they're discontinuous from and more advanced than the previous. So we make leaps in terms of our changes. This is the graphic that was in your book describing the 4 stages for Piaget. The 3 that will be of most interest to us are the pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. If you notice the age ranges according to Piaget, 2 to 7, so that would be the preschool, kindergarten, first grade years. Concrete operational, 7 to 11, so your early elementary into your very early middle school years. And in the formal operational stage from 11 years of age through adulthood, continuing on through one's entire life. For those of you that are looking at the early childhood licensure area, your license is actually birth to 8, so there would be some sensomotor information included in there. For our purposes out of the book, it does not pay a lot of attention to the sensoromotor stage. They're dealing more with the traditional school-age child. If you look at the descriptions of the stages, make some thoughts of these descriptions for the age range that you are likely to teach. What does that mean for your teaching? And we'll see a few examples of that as we move forward. So the sensomotor stage, that's the coordination of sensory experiences with motor actions, mostly done by what would be considered the infants, so the birth to 2. And as you get older, you then realize, the child realizes that these objects continue to exist. For the pre-operational stage, so the preschoolers and kindergarten, first, second graders, that they're then able to represent mentally objects that are not present. However, they still have egocentrism, which causes them to mostly concentrate on their own perspective and to not be able to understand where another viewpoint might be coming from. Animism is interesting if you think about popular culture with Disney and the movies like that. You know, the belief that inanimate objects have lifelike qualities and are capable of action. Think about a lot of the preschool programs, the Disney movies, Sesame Street, things like that. The 3 mountains task is an example of what is done in the pre-operational stage, where if the child is seated, the child still tends to represent the objects as they would see it from where they're sitting, even though they're told to look at it from a different viewpoint. They focus on one characteristic to the exclusion of others. That's the idea of the traditional one. You'll see that experiment in the next slide, that lack of conservation, that objects, that the characteristics stay the same even though they might change in appearance. This is the traditional science experiment that would show the concept of conservation. The idea that a child in the preoperational stage will almost always say that beaker C is a bigger beaker than A or B, even though the amount of liquid is the same. When the child's able to make that leap, then they have progressed deeper into the preoperational stage. Here's some things on the concrete operational stage where what the child is able to do then. So that would be then that science experiments. They would move then from the pre-operational to the concrete operational. They organize by rather than characteristics by several characteristics rather than a single one. In your book, they talked about the ordering of sticks of various lengths. Younger children will tend to group them into small and large. Older children would actually put them in order. And the idea that if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A must be equal to C. Think about how that relates to a math lesson, for example. In the concrete operational stage also, we have the ability to comprehend vertically, horizontally, and obliquely, and make distinctions that a person, say in this generation 3, could have multiple roles in the family. Lastly, in the formal operational stage, the middle school, high school ages and beyond, you have the ability to think in abstract, idealistic, and logical ways, and to come up with hypotheses about ways to solve problems, and then systematically reach a conclusion. Adolescent egocentrism is a little bit different than the pre-operational egocentrism in that it's a heightened self-awareness and a sense of personal uniqueness, which can have both positive and negative connotations. Here are some teaching strategies, and we'll look at these more closely in class on Monday. So what I'd like you to do with this is to come up with some possible strategies that you could use at these different stages. You know, what would be an example of a lesson that you could teach at that particular level? For those of you that will be working with the older adolescents, some strategies for working with them. And then there's a thinking topic. We touched briefly on this in class on Wednesday. We'll look at it again a little bit more closely on Monday. Should teachers allow preschool, kindergarten, and first grader students to play for the bulk of their day? Where do you fall in that debate? These next several slides, we'll talk about more in detail in class. I'm not going to go into them in our short screencast that I'm making for you here today. So just be prepared to discuss putting this theory for Piaget into practice. So as I mentioned, there is a number of criticisms of Piaget's theory. It's not that Piaget has been tossed out, because he is still a valid theory in the idea of educational psychology, but some criticisms of him. One is that some cognitive abilities will emerge earlier in some children, others will emerge later. He had thought that they are unitary structures, that they each exist individually. However, when you look at the concrete operational stage in particular, those skills do not all occur at the same time in every children. He also argued that training is ineffective unless you're at a maturational transition point. What do you believe about that? And as we've learned here now in more recent research, there is a stronger influence on culture and education in a child's development than Piaget had thought to begin with. So Lev Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist, and he came up with a number of things that are used in teaching today. One of the most important terms that you'll learn out of Vygotsky's theory is the zone of proximal development, the ZPD. And it's a range of tasks that's too difficult for the child to master alone, so you learn with guidance and assistance. He terms his guidance and assistance scaffolding. That's another term that you will see and use in your lesson planning when you get to the methods classes. Vygotsky also thought that language and thought develop independently of others and then merge together. And he was very much in the social aspect, so the social aspects of education. Piaget was more of an individualist constructivist. Both are constructivists, so that knowledge is constructed. However, Vygotsky brings in social aspects. Here's the idea of the ZPD. At the lower limit, our level of problem solving reached by the child working alone. So that would be perhaps things that are too easy for that child to do, because the child can do those already on his or her own. Upper limit, level of additional responsibility that the child can accept with assistance of an able instructor. Ideal lessons will fall within a ZPD. If you get a task that's too difficult for the child to master, even with assistance, that will lead to frustration. So both at the top end and at the bottom end, the tasks that child can master alone and the tasks that are too difficult, then you'll have problems. Sorry, I had to drag the screen a little bit bigger so you can see the bottom of the ZPD chart. So here's a comparison then. You can see they both are constructivists. However, Vygotsky brings in the social context. We'll talk about that in class on Monday, where Piaget focuses on the individual. Just like Piaget was criticized, there has been some criticisms of Vygotsky recently, that he's not specific enough about age-related changes. He did not adequately describe how changes in those capabilities contribute to the cognitive development, and that he perhaps overemphasizes the role of language. Again, as with the Piaget ones, we'll take a more close look at these on Monday in class. A reflection question to be thinking about: how has Vygotsky's theory been applied in your own learning? And what was done to scaffold your learning? So we'll conclude the lesson here for Friday's class with this. We'll have that discussion on Monday about Piaget and Vygotsky, and then we'll continue into the idea of cognitive and language development. Thank you, and see you in class.